Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to have you. And at the risk of creating Zoom fatigue, I am glad to be sharing with you. I'm going to share for hopefully about 40 minutes and then provide some time for Q&A at the end. And I want to say that there's a 4-page handout that is in the materials that are online there at the Google Drive. And if you want to refer to that during my presentation or afterward, most of what I'm saying is summarized there in that 4-page document. And it's going to provide a resource for you as we proceed here together today. So the title of my talk is Sabbatical, Who Me? Yes, You. How God's Word and my experience affirm that practicing pastoral sabbatical is truly necessary, powerfully transformational, and surprisingly attainable for the pastor closest to you. So I want to just start with a moment of silence as we center our hearts on the Lord and seek to be ready to listen to him. So let's just give ourselves about 30 seconds of just silence and solitude to wait before the Lord in quiet. Father, we thank you for the gift of silence and solitude. It is a tremendous blessing to come close to you by letting the noise of this world be quiet. And we pray that you would teach us to practice new things, that we might draw closer to you and be effective for you. I pray that all the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart would be acceptable and pleasing to you and would be a blessing to all who are on this Zoom meeting with us right now. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. As we get going here, I'd like to recognize that we have a number of different people in our audience. And so I've asked Paul to put up a sabbatical survey. And Paul, I don't need the notes up there if you don't want to put them up there, but that's fine. What I want to do right now is I want to have everyone just take a poll and choose the choice, the option that's most true of you. I recognize that a lot of us are teaching elders and there might be different places where we are. Maybe you've never taken a sabbatical. Maybe you're a teaching elder and would like to take a sabbatical. I'm sorry, the first one is if you have taken a sabbatical. The next one is if you would like to take a sabbatical. The third one is if you a sabbatical seems wonderful but impossible, just way out of reach. And the fourth one is if you're a teaching elder and you're just kind of indifferent to sabbatical. And then the fifth one is if you're a ruling elder, and we'll talk about the significance of ruling elders in my presentation. But why don't you go ahead and take that poll right now? And we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll process that here momentarily. Paul, there we go. All right, so let's just process this for a minute. Looks like about half of us are ruling elders. We start at the bottom and work our way up. So as ruling elders, I want to just encourage you to listen closely to what we say today. Pastors that you serve alongside of may really need a sabbatical, and it is one of your jobs to support them, to think it through creatively and support them in this spiritual discipline of sabbatical. Thank you for those of you who were honest and said you're indifferent to sabbatical. My goal is to persuade you to think a little bit longer about the significance of sabbatical. So hang in there. And there's a $50,000 reward at the end of the rainbow here. We'll talk about that later. Also, especially if you're a teaching elder and it seems wonderful but impossible. I know that feeling, and I'm here to give you some hope about that. And we'll be talking about resources and some of the ways to make that a reality in your life, Lord willing. Also, if you're a teaching elder and would like to take a sabbatical, I'm glad to hear that 1 out of 5 of us is interested in taking a sabbatical that are pastors and ruling elders. So that's a good 10% of our population here in this poll. And that's exciting to hear that you're interested in taking it. And we also have a great number of you who have taken a sabbatical. So I want to affirm all of you who have taken sabbaticals, and we'll have some time in the Q&A. I want to invite you, especially who are teaching elders who have taken a sabbatical, to help me along as we answer some FAQs at the end. So let's proceed. Also, just one thing I want to mention as we start out here is that I'm aware that some of you may feel like the impossibility is financial, that the financial obstacle of sabbatical just seems to make it completely out of reach, whether the time and the money and those kind of things. Particularly if you're a pastor of a small church that's struggling already financially, it may seem even harder than usual. And we recognize that some of those are very challenging situations. My congregation is about 180 members. And so it was a big stretch for our church. And I totally feel that feeling with you and want you to know that even though I'm quite aware of that pressure, I want to encourage you to listen to this talk and promise that we will talk about some very adequate resources as we get along with our time today. So let me just open with my story a little bit. I just have to say that my biggest regret in 21 years of ministry so far is that I waited until my 20th year to take my first sabbatical. If I could go back and speak to my younger self 15 years ago or so, I would have gotten across the table, looked myself in the eyes, grabbed myself by the lapels of my jacket, and insisted, young man, you need a sabbatical like fields need rain. If you forsake sabbatical, you will forfeit spiritual, pastoral, and personal formation that God has designed for you. You know, I was aware of sabbaticals, but no one ever told me how truly necessary they were for us as pastors. And honestly, I wish there was someone like what I'm doing today to tell you that had spoken up and shook me and said, Pastor Tim, take a sabbatical every 7th year. Well, there are 3 points that I want to cover today. The first one is how necessary sabbaticals are. And so let me proceed by just talking about the necessity of sabbaticals. I want to begin by just acknowledging that pastors are struggling at an unprecedented rate right now in our culture. As many as 38% of pastors have contemplated leaving the ministry in this past year, according to Barna Research and the CT article that's there in the link. Now, if that many pastors are thinking about leaving, many more are feeling great pressure and just haven't gotten clear with themselves that they want to leave, or they're just feeling a lot of pressure in general. You as pastors know that the pressures of pastoral ministry are varied and vast. We have a lifestyle job that requires public visibility, spiritual leadership, organizational leadership, pastoral presence, and being on call. Our work has all the elements of being visible like a public official, spiritual like a priest, contemplative like a monk, visionary like a CEO, on call like a physician, caring like a counselor, and more, all rolled into one. Oh, and yes, public speaking. Preach a deep exegetical sermon with relevant application week after week after week. Most pastors report that they're working between 55 and 75 hours per week. Some other facts about pastors from Lifeway say that 84% say that they're on call 24/7. 80% say they expect conflict in their church. 54% find the role of pastor frequently overwhelming. 53% are often concerned about their family's financial security. And 48% often feel the demands of ministry are more than they can handle. Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of Matthew 11:28-30 in the Message translation captures this thought. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Now, I also want to emphasize that pastoral sabbaticals are not just for those who are tired. Robert Saylor, who's an author of the book Planning Sabbaticals, a guide for congregations and their pastors, has this to emphasize. He says, sabbaticals are for healthy pastors in healthy congregations. They are like the regular maintenance on a vehicle, like the oil change, or the big maintenance on a house that has to happen periodically, like roof repair and furnaces. They keep pastors and congregations healthy. So what is a sabbatical? Toward a definition of sabbatical, let me offer a few sentences that summarize it from different points of view and hopefully bring together a composite picture of what we're talking about when we talk about sabbatical. First of all, a sabbatical is a spiritual discipline of rest and reflection where a pastor or other spiritual leader pauses from the work of ministry and focuses on the work of abiding with Christ. Here's a second definition. Pastoral sabbatical is an extended period, usually of 3 months, in which the pastor steps away from the day-to-day practices of ministry in order to focus on their spiritual development with an eye toward returning to the congregation with renewed energy for ministry. Sabbatical is an intentional period of sacred rest unto the Lord your God, where all the pastoral duties and ministry experience are suspended in order to cease from work and experience rest and renewal. My coach on sabbatical said that sabbatical is the big no that helps you to say the little no's later. The sabbatical is not an extended vacation merely, but rather a strategic season of non-ministry to re-energize and to reinvigorate. It may involve travel, but focuses on 3 primary phases: rest, recalibration, and re-entry. Here's one more definition as we look at this. Sabbatical is a spiritual journey for both the pastor and the whole congregation. It invites the whole congregation to engage in a spiritual journey of prayer and engagement, emphasizing the priesthood of all believers who take a step of faith and collectively strengthen their spiritual muscles. Sabbatical rest is modeled by Jesus. We see that Jesus went into the wilderness after his baptism. It says, and Jesus, Luke 4:1, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days. I recognize that that's less than 3 months, but I think Jesus was perhaps more efficient about sabbaticals and maybe was able to get the sufficient rest he needed in less time. Mark 6:31 shows that Jesus says to his disciples, come away with me by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So we see that Jesus models rest with silence and solitude, and he also brings his followers, his fellow future leaders, into the practices and patterns of rest. Sabbatical is a biblical pattern that emerges out of the Old Testament in Leviticus. Every 6th year, every 7th year was a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. Sabbatical is also an act of faith. Think about what it takes, even as you think about the question of how will I afford it? What will my people do while I'm away? How will I encounter God in silence and solitude? Leviticus says this, if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, if we may not sow or gather our crop? I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year so that it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. So when you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating some of the old crop. You shall eat the old until the 9th year when the new crop arrives. In my next section, I just want to talk, as we talk about the importance of sabbatical, about just the benefits to the pastor, and then also the benefits to the congregation. And I've seen these firsthand through my experience. So first of all, how do sabbaticals benefit the pastor? Well, first of all, it helps the pastor to regroup from the unique stressors and strains of ministry, preventing both burnouts like depression and fatigue and flame out, moral failure. So one of those 2 errors to be avoided, right, where the pastor's just so tired he can't do it anymore, or where he just gets so pressurized that he ends his ministry through moral failure, like an affair or something like that. A sabbatical provides deep rest, physically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Especially I want to note here the idea of relational fatigue. You know, we as pastors are in very giving relationships, but pastors often don't have good friendships, and we don't have a lot of life-giving relationships. So sabbatical is very important to just take some time from the social relationship structure that we're a part of. During my sabbatical, I had pretty seclusionary practices, and my congregation lovingly afforded me that space. And there was only a couple of reasons for a few infrequent phone calls along the way. And that really rejuvenated me to come back and serve them lovingly. Sabbatical is also a benefit in that we can connect with God, ourself, and with others. One thing I experienced in sabbatical was just the ability to be fully present for my family in a beautiful way that has remained more constant since my sabbatical rest. Sabbatical helps a pastor to become more aware of him or herself, more aware of his or her congregation, more aware of so many things, but especially self-awareness. Sabbatical prepares us to listen to God's direction for our life. It helps us see our ministry from a new perspective. It helps the pastor to stay in the same role for the long haul, leading to long-term effective ministries. That was part of one of those definitions that you heard at the beginning, that the rest is intended to bring about renewal for the pastor as well as for the congregation. As we think about this, one of the things I just want to put in your mind is how challenging it is when a church goes through a change of leadership. Let's say a pastor doesn't get a sabbatical and he just leaves because he just needs social break and he just feels a different sense of call and he doesn't have that longevity in ministry. The cost of that transition of seeking a new pastor often outweighs the benefits of giving your own pastor a sabbatical. And so a pastor who has a sabbatical and then returns back to the same congregation with renewed energy has such a leverage and such a benefit toward that congregation as well. I also want to add that sabbaticals benefit the congregation in a number of different ways. They prevent codependency of relying on the pastor for too much. They can clarify the unhealthy patterns that may have crept in and over-reliance on the pastor. The congregation gains a renewed appreciation for their pastor. He's away for a while. They're under another preacher for at least 10 to 13 weeks or more. And they who called their pastor are always usually willing to welcome them back, and they have a new sense of his gifts toward them. It helps the congregation to grow in faith under alternate leadership. Volunteer improvement has been found to increase as laity steps up as the priesthood of all believers. For example, in our church, we had to create a care ministry because the pulpit supply pastor who filled in for me in my sabbatical time was only half-time instead of full-time. And so we leaned on our deacons and our elders to do more of the visitation work, and they stepped up, and that and many other things as well. Sabbatical also rebalances leadership to allow the session to make decisions without their pastor, sometimes the loudest voice in the room, giving the session a sense of their own identity and the opportunity to grow. Sabbaticals help retain pastors who know their flock, the community, and the dynamics that take years to achieve. The last part of this section is how long it should be a sabbatical. So we're going to get a few of the preliminary big things out of the way here with some of the definitions and describing sabbatical. The golden amount of time for a sabbatical is about 13 weeks, 1/4 of the year. Too much shorter and the full benefits of the rest and rejuvenation don't have time to sink in, but too much longer than 13 weeks and it's a little bit too much time away from the church for most churches, and there can be a bit more struggle upon reentry. If you can take a 6-month sabbatical though, go for it, but 13 weeks seems to be the sweet spot for most pastors according to the wisdom that's been conveyed by others who are experienced in having sabbaticals. Your sabbatical should go through at least 3 phases: rest, engaging in meaningful activities to renew your spirit, have time with God, time to develop a stronger relationship, hear the Spirit speaking. Some time of recalibration. So not just merely rested, but in a different posture of the soul, establishing some new rhythms that can come back into pastoral life and ministry. And then re-entry, like the last 3 weeks or so of your time should probably spend some time thinking forward to what you want to see when you come back. But the first 2/3 should be entirely rest and rejuvenating, doing things that are encouraging and life-giving for you. Enjoy, though, the times, the days to sleep in, spend time with God, not have to work on a sermon late in the week. Be with yourself, be with God, be with your family. Maybe pick up a new hobby. The Lilly Foundation asks, what makes your soul sing? That's a great question to ask as you think about what you would want to do during sabbatical. So in summary here about the importance of sabbatical, I just want to say that a well-designed sabbatical should be about 13 weeks, should be well planned, and it should be coached. You should have someone who's a guide giving you accountability and some structure to your sabbatical along the way. And there's some resources at the end to talk about coaching. But what sabbatical is not? Sabbatical is not just a time to work on your book that you never get around to writing. It's not a time to work on something else. It's a time to rest. It's not just merely vacation. It's a spiritual discipline. And it's not laziness. It is an exhibition of obedience unto the Lord to rest deeply in his ways and in his pace, his pattern of life. So that first part is really the first half of my presentation. I just want to emphasize how truly necessary sabbatical is. And I want to move on to talk about how powerfully transforming it is. I've got a before and after shot, and let me see if I can share my screen here. Oop. I guess I can't. Well, I had a before and after picture, but the upshot of the deal is it's the same picture of me before and after. Oh, I'm a co-host. Let's see here. I spoiled it. Don't know if that did it. Tell me now, Zoom. Okay, there we go. So I just wanted to show you my before and after picture, so you can see the difference that sabbatical made. That's the before shot, and that's the after shot. As you can see, I look the same, but the benefit of sabbatical is so internal. It's about what we experience as we draw closer to the Lord. So I look like the same pastor, but I assure you, I've really become a very transformed person through my sabbatical experience. Let me just talk about some of the highlights of my own sabbatical. One of the things that was a real blessing for me was that our church was awarded the Lilly Grant for Pastoral Sabbatical, which enabled me to have time to travel with my family. And we were able to go to some different places together as a family. Went on a trip with my wife, and also with a best friend, we went and hiked the Grand Canyon. That was really rewarding and really helped me to disconnect well. But honestly, the most important part of the sabbatical was facing myself. And those kind of things began quite quickly in sabbatical. While my wife and I are on our first trip, as we were preparing to return from Mexico, one of my daughters needed to be hospitalized for severe depression. And we realized that there are some really heavy things going on that we knew about, but we were afforded by God's providence and grace and timing the opportunity to really be fully present with her in a way that we would have never been able to do if we'd been in ongoing ministry. Also, another thing that happened during sabbatical is that my wife and I began to really look back over the last 7 years of ministry since coming to the East Coast here. And we began to recognize that we really had a lot of losses to grieve, that, we just kind of just moved on and just kind of kept rolling as most of us do in our life. We realized that when we could count all those losses, that there are some pretty significant areas of trauma that we'd been experiencing, and that we really needed the Lord's presence in our life in a new way. It really wasn't until sabbatical that we had the time together to process and catch up on those conversations that we had postponed over and over again, and process some of the great strains that were upon us and our marriage, my wife's spiritual health and physical health, and our family life as well. What I began to realize is that there had been a number of warning signs kind of on the dashboard of my life, like those little squiggly lights that go on in your dashboard that you don't really know what they mean. But you have to pay attention to those. And some warning signs that I've been ignoring in my own life was that I had been overworking. I really began to depend on work more than I ought to for my identity and for my hope and happiness, as the Catechism defines idolatry. I'd become less available to people. I was there, but I was kind of distant and not always fully paying attention, really fully available to people. And I began to have some conflict with a few key leaders. And my spiritual disciplines were becoming perfunctory at best and even non-existent at times. To quote Pete Scazzaro, my being with God was not enough to sustain my doing for God. One other indicator light that was going on in my life was that I was experiencing a short fuse when it came to being easily angered, especially when I was in the safe environment of being in my home, when I didn't have to be on in front of other people. I found that I was experiencing a real struggle with just being angry with myself, being angry with circumstances around me, and at times angry with family members as well. For me, sabbatical caught me by surprise. I had told my congregation that I wasn't taking sabbatical because I felt tired or burned out, but just because I felt like it was a healthy pattern, and I was beginning to feel the early phases of potential fatigue. Maybe my tires were getting a little worn thin. But what I realized was I had just really not learned at all how to slow down. And that having some spiritual growth of connecting with God and spiritual disciplines like silence and solitude and journaling created a space and environment for God to speak to me deeply, for me to ask questions that I've been avoiding, and to press into those questions and ask God what he wanted to teach me through those experiences. I learned that speeding up in my life leads to harm down the road, that going back is necessary in order to go forward for spiritual health as well as organizational leadership, and that facing pain is good and healthy, not bad. If you have done anything like practicing regular Sabbath days or sabbatical, what you're going to find is there's a lot of revelation that happens in this environment. Even though you may not feel like you need a sabbatical, what's a little bit funny is you're going to feel this sense of like angst when you're not working, because you've been so used to finding your identity in what you do. So that's a bit about my story. And I want to just close by now talking about how sabbatical is surprisingly attainable, and then talking about some resources to help you as you think practically about sabbatical. So how did I get on sabbatical? What obstacles did I have to overcome? Well, the first obstacle is myself. I had to actually ask for one. Like I talked about my regrets about 21 years of ministry, I honestly believe that I could have asked for a sabbatical at the former church that I served at least once or twice in my 14 years there. And I just never was humble enough, aware enough, or concerned enough to actually ask for a sabbatical. It felt selfish. It felt self-serving. It felt unnecessary. And I frankly didn't really feel like slowing down. So I had to get over myself. The other hurdle I had to get over was also just, thinking about how to communicate this to my church, my leadership, and my congregation. And then the third hurdle was finances. It felt impossible to do it. Our church didn't see a way through. In fact, we had a very challenging congregational meeting where my prospective sabbatical was brought before the congregation. And there was a lot of questions, a lot of people just uneasy about the whole idea, uncertain about the timing of it, the health of our church, the way that we would provide for it financially. It was an important conversation, and it was a healthy one because it enabled us to think it through well. I inevitably postponed my sabbatical by about a half a year in order to apply for the Lilly grant. And that was also part of God's providence of doing that. But I had to get over those three hurdles: as myself, churches, and finances. So if you're all thinking about sabbatical, and I hope that you are, let me just talk about some steps, 9 steps toward taking a sabbatical that will help you get on the track of doing this. The first step is you need to resolve that you will prayerfully pursue taking a sabbatical. You simply need to think this through and pause and stop and ask yourself, is this for me? Why would I not take sabbatical? And actually maybe journal about this, but get clear about the importance and priority of sabbatical in your own life. Secondly, share that desire with your spouse and 1 or 2 other close friends or elders. Share that with your personnel team and or your session. Maybe one of your annual reviews come up, and tell them that you're beginning to think about sabbatical and that you're asking God and them for wisdom. Just beginning to share with other people is an important step in that process. Thirdly, ask your personnel or relevant committee in your church to draft a sabbatical policy for your church. That's important to provide necessary resources and to begin to discuss. But I really want to encourage you to let your other team members lead with you in this. And having a policy in place is great, because then you can actually enact the policy when it's time for you to take sabbatical. Number 4, choose a date when you want to implement the policy for the sabbatical for yourself. And I want to also say that this should be done in conversation with your staff, key members of your session, and your congregation. Don't just do it and then tell them, but think about that strategically and in conversation with others. Then prayerfully share the plans at a congregational meeting. Be prepared to answer objections and deal with a variety of responses. I recommend having someone else present the benefits and the frequently asked questions about sabbatical. And so it's not you, but show that there are other leaders within your church that really value this journey of sabbatical, and especially share those benefits both to the pastor as well as the benefits to the congregation. Also then develop a team to help plan a successful sabbatical. We developed a team of 5 or 6 people who are called our sabbatical team. And we began meeting about 6 to 12 months before the sabbatical to think through all the logistics that needed to be done to cause health for our congregation during my absence. That was a planned absence that was well designed. Also, find a coach to help you and guide your sabbatical. I've got some resources below that talk about coaching. And then 8th, apply for the Lilly Grant. I'm going to talk with some more details about this, but the Lilly Grant is awarded to over about 100 pastors and their congregations per year. It is a grant of $50,000. $15,000 of it goes directly to the church for pulpit supply and program activities. And the remaining $35,000 is available to you as a pastor for specific program activities that you create a budget for and then implement in order to make a sabbatical that allows your heart to sing. 9thly, enjoy your sabbatical. So I recognize that the biggest question probably about sabbaticals is how can I afford going on sabbatical? And the authors of sabbatical books recognize this as well. Bullock, in their excellent book, Clergy Renewal, say this: covering the costs of renewal leave is often one of the greatest roadblocks to taking a sabbatical. Funding for renewal leave is best addressed at the beginning of one's service in a congregation. So first of all, think about this. If you're taking on a new call somewhere, sabbatical and future sabbatical should be part of your terms of call that you should negotiate with a church that wants to call you into a new position. For most of us, of course, that's too late. We are already in the church and we may not have been that smart to negotiate ahead of time, but money set aside by the congregation for renewal leave can substantially reduce the budget impact during the year in which the leave is taken. Authors have also suggested some ways to save your own money, maybe putting aside some personal money, using your continuing education budget, kind of rolling that forward and putting that forward with permission, saving gifts from funerals and weddings, or special writing projects. Bullock also mentions that some congregations have also held auctions or dinners or special offerings, gift matching. You know, sometimes there are people within our churches that if they understand a need and the significance of it, they've got some deep pockets, and you'd be surprised that suddenly God can provide someone with some significant resources to help you go on sabbatical. Of all the places that I've looked in searching for sabbatical resources, the one and only best one that I'm currently aware of is the Lilly Foundation Clergy Renewal Program. The website for the Clergy Renewal Program is provided there in the handout. And I want to just mention a few things about it so you're aware of it. The timeliness of my presentation to you is key because the deadline to apply for the renewal grant is this year, April 27, 2022. The process is that you apply for that grant right now. It gets approved. You turn it in by April 27th. It gets approved by the end of August. And then you're able to take the leave beginning in the following year. So this time around, it'll be 2023. And so, like, as I mentioned, it's a $50,000 grant. It is a grant proposal that you write. And so if you're interested in doing this, I encourage you to speak with some people who have done some grant writing or make connection with someone who has successfully received the Lilly grant for their congregation. They'll be able to give you some really great tips. I'd be happy to share some of mine if you do decide to take this path, and would be overjoyed to see you also become a fellow Lilly recipient. So you can see that there at cts.edu. If you just simply look up Lilly Clergy Renewal, you'll get pretty readily to their website. And if you need any help along the way, I'd be happy to help you with those steps. Let me mention a few other websites, and then we'll pause for some question and answer and process a little bit of what I've shared with you in summary form here. A couple other websites. There are some excellent summary benefits. Paul, is it possible to get the page back up there again that we had earlier? Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, if you just scroll up just a little bit there. Yep, thank you. So there are a number of different websites that have resources. Some websites just provide excellent summary of benefits and reasons of sabbatical with links to other resources. That one there at pastorsoul.com and soulshepherding.org both have some great things. There's also a resource called sabbaticalguide.com, and they function in some ways of coaching. We'll get to that in a minute. Probably the two best books I'd recommend for sabbatical study is Robert Saylor's Planning Sabbaticals, A Guide to Congregations and Their Pastors. This covers the whole array. It's not a hard read. It's, a pretty thin book, probably like about 100 pages or so, not even 75 pages. And you get all the most important things that you'll need to know. Also, Richard Bullock and Richard Brusenhoff, Clergy Renewal, the Alban Guide to Sabbatical Planning is a tremendous resource as well. On here, I've provided some planning resources and coaching under letter E. If we scroll down a little bit more there, we can see there's a sabbaticalguide.com. That's a coaching service that for a flat fee will connect you with a lot of resources and other things like that. The Navigators has invested heavily in their people in doing sabbaticals. And if you go to that link right there, you can see their PDF of their whole sabbatical guide. It's about 40 pages or so and provides some great things. Randy Hallbettel, one of our TEs in the Presbytery of the East, used the Navigator Guide as one of the framework structures of his, and I know he'd be happy to talk to you about that. Also, there's some other resources like leadershiptransformations.org. Both Jim Smith and Brett Payne are coaches that I and others have used. And so if you go on sabbatical, it's important to look at some of those resources of coaching. All right. Oh, Randy is not a TE, but a missionary. So my apologies there. Like correction coming through. All right, so there's a bunch of resources there. Also, Quiet Waters gives intensives. So if you're starting a sabbatical and you need a place to go at the very beginning to really get geared up and get away with God to start your sabbatical in a real kickoff way, that is a phenomenal thing to do as well. We have a number of Presbytery of the East pastors and missionaries who have taken sabbaticals. In addition to me, Tim McGowan, Randy Hallbettel, Ken Glazer, Steve McLean, David Cook, John Torres, Bonnie Gatchell, Tom Milligan, and Matt Blazer have all taken sabbaticals or mini sabbaticals. And I'm sure that any of us who have taken sabbaticals and benefited from it would be very happy to hear from you and share with you our experiences, because we really have benefited greatly from what we've experienced. All right, so what I want to do right now is I want to just close our time by allowing some question and answer. And I think it'd be helpful if you have some questions. They might be helpful. You can either share them by jumping into the conversation or by raising your hand or by a comment, and we'll try to field them as they come up.
Can I say, before we jump into question and answer, I forgot to give this resource to you, a very local resource in two ways. Matt Blazer pastors at the Covenant Presbyterian Church, and they have a 38-acre retreat center.
Yes.
That he loves for people to come and utilize. Route 1 has come here for our group retreats. I've come here for a solo retreat. And there's some nice hiking nearby and a cute little town. So anyways, get a hold of Matt Blazer to hook that up, but that's a resource that's available to you. It's not where you would want to do a full sabbatical, but you could do a pre-thinking, weekend or week or something.
Excellent. Thank you, Bonnie.
Tim.
Yeah. Jay Lee, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Tim, thank you for that great presentation. Full disclosure and transparency, I'm not a believer in sabbaticals. And so I just wanted to throw that out there before I comment or ask a question. You said it took you 20 years to take a sabbatical. And my question to you is, currently the EPC requires, or not mandates, but recommends 4 weeks of vacation and 2 weeks of study leave for all our teaching elders, which is about 6 weeks out. What was the quality of your vacation and study leave like before sabbatical? Or because where I'm coming from is, if you were taking your vacation and study leave, would you still want to have that sense of need to take a sabbatical?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jay. That's a great question. And I've spoken with a number of other pastors who have emphasized the importance of maximizing all the vacation and study leave time that they're given. I would answer that, though, by saying that I would rate my study leave time and my vacation time as pretty high quality. There's probably ways I could have used study leave a bit better. But the fact of the matter is that it's hard to take all 6 weeks at one span of time. And I don't know about you, but if you've never taken a 2-week vacation, it's amazing. Just enlarging that period of time alone really helps you to fully disconnect. And it's really like, for most people, not until the second week that they're really truly deeply in rest and really disconnected from what they're doing. And one person actually recommends taking 3 weeks of vacation at a time, 1 week to just get disconnected, 1 week to rest, and then 1 week to really be ready to come back in again. So one of the things about sabbatical is that if it's just vacation time, we don't fully stop our work. And it doesn't seem to fully fulfill this call to get away and to really cease from our labors in a way that's deep and refreshing. So that would be my comment there. I recognize that some people aren't able to take sabbaticals, and they maybe take like a whole summer, like a month out of the summer off, a whole month at a time. And I commend you for doing that. But I can tell from my own personal experience that my investment in vacation and study leave was pretty good. I never leave extra days on the table for the most part, but I still needed some time off to really stop fully, be very close to my family, get coached, and really rejuvenate. So that would be my answer.
Yeah. And it's my journey, because prior to becoming a pastor, I was in the corporate world for close to 15 years. And from my perspective, in the corporate world, you don't really see, other than in academia, people taking sabbaticals. So it's probably from that as well. But thank you. And I hope to have some more dialogues with you one-on-one.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jay.
I think, one just thing I recently learned in preparing for this talk, I didn't really walk with Tim in it. This is all his stuff, but, and wanting to be resourceful, is I started looking at things and found in the Harvard Business Review that 17% of corporate businesses have added sabbaticals to their full-time staff.
Cool.
And Google has added a nap room.
That's right. All right. Great. Thanks. Stefan Bomberger, I see you. Go ahead, buddy.
Hey, Tim, thank you so much for your teaching. It was really inspiring, and I'm glad to hear that you're refreshed from your time away. I've been in full-time ministry since 2004, and providentially, about every 7 years, the Lord relocates me or reassigns me. And so I never feel, it seems a little presumptuous to get somewhere and be like, hey, I've never had a break. So I was in South Florida right around year 7, and then I came back to Manoa at the next 7-year interval. I guess my first question on practicality is, it seems even if you've been in ministry for 14, or now I've been 18 years, I've never had a sabbatical, but it feels like I wouldn't even want to broach that conversation with Manoa until I'm 6 or 7 years in. Just what are your thoughts on transitions for pastors? And would you agree that you should be at the same place for 7 years before you even request that? Because obviously if you put the clock on yourself, that's different than you put the clock on your recent calling. So any thoughts on?
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan. That's a great question. My little background, my wife believed that we should have taken a sabbatical between our 2 calls. In fact, she really felt like that was needed. And when we got on sabbatical, this was the conversation that was the hard one to have, was she felt pretty frustrated that we never did that. And for me, I really felt like trying to take a sabbatical while I'm in the middle of moving in transition just didn't feel like it was going to be restful at all. So I didn't think that that was going to work. Perhaps, though, that's one way to negotiate it. is if you're taking a new call, your old church and your new church could give you some pivot time where you could, if God's, moving you every 7th year, that's something there. I do think it's important, though, that the goal of taking sabbatical within the context of your local church is that you can rest and then seek longevity in the ministry that you're in. So I really want to weigh that point heavily. I get that. I would say, though, I wouldn't wait until year 7 to begin asking or talking about sabbatical. I'd start talking about it now so that when year 6 or 7 comes, everything's like in place and ready, and you have a leadership that's already begun putting money aside and is ready to be invested in you. So, that putting that money aside right now and having a plan, it's no better time than now to get started on it. So that would be the first thing that I would say. And then maybe, stay longer than 7 years somewhere.
Yeah. Well,
that's a challenge. But, I think the biggest thing is we're afraid to ask, and we feel like it's presumptuous, to do so. And, Scripture says you have not because you ask not. So I think you can at least ask, seek, and knock and look for a way, because it's not just you and the church that has the 7-year relationship, but it's you and the Lord that has a span of time. And as a pastor, I'm committed to taking as best I can, as God provides from this point forward, sabbatical every 7th year. And that's just going to be something that I'm going to talk about with my current church. And if I ever serve in another church, that'll be something that's on the table. And if it's time for me to take sabbatical, I'm going to try to land as close to it. Obviously, though, when you first arrive, there's a honeymoon stage, there's a bonding stage, there's a development stage. There's a lot of first few years that really have to get underway in building that relationship. So I would say at minimum, you need to be serving in a church for, I would say 3 or 4 years before really getting serious about the sabbatical timing. But something to think about there too, that just within your own span of life, it's so rewarding and so important, and such an important spiritual discipline to pursue sabbatical.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, go ahead.
So just practical things like in our book of order, session can't meet without pastor to moderate sacraments. What did you do to keep your church compliant to the book of order for 3 months and not bringing everything to a screeching halt? How much did you line up the preaching and the preachers while you're away versus just yielded at the session and those types of things?
Yeah. So in searching for sabbatical pastor, we looked for someone who had EPC ordination that could serve as a transitional pastor as our first choice. And we were lucky to find one, or blessed to find one. And so Rhonda Nunzio, who is a retired EPC pastor, filled in for the whole time I was away. And then it was a matter of having him moderate the session. And that brought us to a lot of continuity. I will hasten to add, though, it's important to talk about some expectations with your leadership team about what kinds of decisions can be made while you're away on sabbatical and what things are off limits or need you to be involved in the conversation, because you want to make sure that things go well. And, you just have to agree ahead of time, these kind of things, you should call me about these things. You can go ahead and you've got autonomy or authority to go ahead and to pursue. But ideally, if you can find someone who is an EPC pastor to do the whole thing, or a moderator who can moderate the session while public supply is happening. Those are pretty much the 2 options that you got there to maintain that.
Okay, I recognize that Steve McLean has his hand up. If you could call upon him, Tim.
Yep, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
So the Argyle congregation graciously granted me 4 sabbaticals during my 33 years there. And I'm very grateful for that. And we were deeply influenced to begin this program by Eugene Peterson. And one of the things that he says is that pastoring is not harder than any other profession. It's just different. And one of the ways that it's different that he pointed out was the relational component. And he makes the point in his writings that the reason pastors move every 6 or 7 years is relational fatigue. It's not because they want to leave where they are. They would like to stay, but they're just so relationally exhausted that the only way to get out from under that they know of is to move. And so we found sabbaticals was a way to break that. It was a way to break that in a way that vacation and study leave doesn't. It breaks that. It allows you to get that break. So, so when I would come back, I would already know everybody. I didn't have to start all over and build up a ministry. And sabbaticals do cost money, but they're a lot cheaper often than finding a new pastor. So I'm a big fan of sabbaticals.
Thank you, Steve. That's excellent. Does anyone else have any other questions, either about funding or about the benefits of sabbatical or any other topic that came up? Okay. All right, then hearing none, let me just conclude by just summarizing a few of my experiences and encouraging you in this opportunity before us. First of all, if you were a ruling elder, I hope that you heard some of the clear benefits of sabbatical, both to your pastor and to your church, and that you're encouraged to know that your pastors really love you and they love your church and they want to serve, but it's important for them to get rest and deep rest at times. And sabbatical is unparalleled in providing that kind of rest. And you are key influencers in your congregations toward helping pastors that want to pursue sabbaticals. If you're a pastor who's indifferent to sabbatical or opposed to it, I hope that some of the things I've said today have sparked your interest and have maybe helped you to consider some of the biblical reasons why sabbaticals are to be considered, as well as some of the benefits that sabbatical is so unique and distinctive in providing. If you are interested in sabbatical and it just feels out of reach right now, I want to encourage you to begin to pray about it and ask for God to stir in your heart and to make a way for you to take a sabbatical in the future. I can assure you that it is a challenging journey, but it's a very rewarding journey, both for you and your church. And I don't think that, I don't know if I certainly wouldn't be as healthy in ministry as I am right now without my sabbatical. And I don't know where I'd be at if I hadn't gotten a sabbatical. The pandemic and last year were just an avalanche of challenges for me. And, but even more importantly than that, I needed some more self-awareness. And so I just want to encourage you, those resources are out there. The Little League grant feels like a huge mountain, but they're a very loving group and they love to bless churches and they've got the resources to bless richly and deeply. And so I hope that you'll think about that. And if you're going to think about it for 2023, now is the time to start those wheels in motion and use the resources that are in that page there to click through and learn more about the Lilly Grant.
And Joe, I think Joe has a
Yes,
question.
I just saw Joe. So go ahead, Joe. If you want to make a comment or have a question.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to speak from the perspective of a ruling elder. Your perspective obviously has been from a teaching elder's point, but this is directed primarily to the ruling elders. I've been at Goodwill for quite some time now. Previous to Pastor John, I had Pastor Stu Pullman. And then of course, Pastor John came on board. Stu was with us for 23 years. John has exceeded that. He's been with us for more than 23 years. All during that time, we've always allowed our pastors to have the study leave and the vacation time and so forth, but we never had anything in writing and any documentation that would specifically address the sabbatical for our pastors. A few years ago, and I think it was at Gap, Pennsylvania, that there was some gentlemen that came up and they talked about pastors burnout and so forth. Anyway, it got me to thinking, and I investigated a little further. Anyway, I brought to our elder board a template for how to go about doing a sabbatical, which I would be happy to share with anybody who's interested. But the whole point is as a ruling board, as the ruling elders, we joined together, discussed it, and actively pursued putting together a very formula plan for sabbaticals to give not only to Pastor John, but of course the subsequent pastors who are serving. We're fortunate because we are a multi-pastor church. We're a little bit larger, so we're able to have pastors to fill in and so forth. But the whole point is the ruling elders took a very active part. And so speaking to the ruling elders now, and I know there's large churches as well as smaller churches, it's definitely a benefit. Pastor John just had a 4-month sabbatical that we were able to arrange for him. During that period of time when he was gone, the elder board stepped up and took a very active role, as we generally do anyway, in serving the church. Our pastors were able to fill in. But the benefit to Pastor John was remarkable. Pastor Jose will be having one this coming year. He's been with us over 10 years now as a pastor. So I encourage our ruling elders to really look into this. The information that you've passed out, Tim, is very valuable. There's a lot of resources that are available. And I would encourage all the ruling elders, whether it be a big board or small, to take a really hard look at that information and to really encourage their pastors to do this. Because sometimes, quite honestly, pastors do feel a little bit reticent to want to step forward and say, listen, I need time. So I think it's incumbent upon us as under shepherds to say, listen, we see what you're doing. We appreciate your involvement and we want to do something for you. And I might also note to our ruling elders, and I'm sure we're aware of this, but we don't always voice it. In my own personal life, I had a job, which I went to every day, and then I came home. I had my personal life, which was my personal life at home. On Sundays and weekends and other events, I would go to church, and that was all separated. As a pastor, you gentlemen have your personal life, your professional life, and your spiritual life is all tied into one. So there's never any separation for you. And I think we don't understand that oftentimes, but I hope that when I point that out, people consider that as well. So I encourage all my ruling elder brothers and sisters to really take an active role in caring for our pastors because they need our care. Thank you.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. That's a blessing. I'm really encouraged that you guys got on the sabbatical train there, as it were, at Goodwill. And I know that's been a real blessing. And I'm glad you can do it for more than one of your pastors. That's excellent. So it's good. Good.
Hey, Tim, I just want
Do
to
you have anything further?
Tim, I just want to add one thing, and that is that Lilly grant, that foundation grant is a wonderful thing. We never got it in Argyle. We were not as smart and funny as Tim was. But so make your decision about the sabbatical separate from getting that grant.
Yeah.
If you get the grant, it's great, but be committed to the sabbatical. That we funded each one differently. There's lots of variety of how you can do that. So.
Yeah.
In order for me to take my sabbatical, which was only 6 weeks, I just paid for it myself. I got paid while I was on it, but that's it. The Route One didn't have the money to pay for a sabbatical. We might have it by the next round, but as someone who's also very similar to a solo pastor, I wear multiple hats. The Lilly grant is a great one. I would never, well, I don't qualify because I don't pastor in the traditional sense, but I also wouldn't have the time to apply. And I understand that many of you might be in that boat as well. So Tim, though, is available to help and guide because he did get it. Yeah, so that was great. Tim, thank you so much for your hard work. I know you spent time, lots of time and energy on this.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate the well-balanced, practical and theological presentation that you gave for us today.
Well, you're very, very welcome. And I pray that it's going to prove beneficial to you in the future, all of you as beloved TEs and REs. So thank you so much for listening and giving me your attention. As a close too, I just want to also say that that presentation for Not Done Yet, that's about emerging adults. I just want to emphasize that's our next event. And that is for everyone. It's not just for staff, church people that work with, emerging adults. It's a whole systems approach to how your church can be effective as a whole body at reaching emerging adults. And so I know Dr. Severson has some great things to share, and I hope that you'll all consider coming because this is one of the largest generations ever, and yet one of the most unreached, and we need to reach them with the gospel. So just a plug for the next presentation. I hope you'll check it out. It's at an alternate time. You got to log in the middle of your week, but it will be 100% worth it. So check it out. All right.